Hi guys, hope you had a great weekend and I hope you guys are all staying safe and healthy. Um, Last week we started talking about World War II and how the United States got involved and kind of was preparing to fight a war. This week we are going to look at the actual fighting that was going on in World War II from the U.S. perspective. And when we talk about the U.S. at war, guys, we have to understand the thinking of the leaders of the United States government, of the um, Army and Navy. They decided that they would um, make sure that we took care of Germany first, right? So remember, we're in a two-front war, fighting Germany and Japan. And even though Japan is the country that attacked us, surprise attacked us, killed hundreds and hundreds of Americans at Pearl Harbor without a declaration of war, surprise attack, right? We talked about that kind of got America all together collectively to ball up their fist and say, "How dare you?" And um, that really got Americans to come together for the war effort. We talked about the vote, one dissenting vote in the entire Congress to go to war with Japan. Um, so, despite that fact, our leaders basically said, we're going to make sure that we take care of Germany first, and then we'll leave Japan for later. And so, that front, basically, that campaign was really shorted on money and troops and supplies because the bulk of our efforts was going to fighting Germany. And part of that decision, guys, was uh, Japan, while they were a threat to the British and their colonies, they were not a threat to conquering England. They were not a threat to conquering the British. They were not even fighting the Soviets. So um, it's kind of funny. Germany said, "Hey, we got your back, Japan," and declared war on the United States when we declared war on Japan. Um, but remember, guys, the Germans, they're fighting the Soviet Union. They're fighting Russia, and the Japanese are like, "Yeah, no, we're not declaring war on the Soviet Union. We don't want to fight them, at least not right now. Maybe once you guys almost have them knocked out, we'll jump in and say, hey, look, we helped." Um, so that's kind of a funny situation there. But the point is, yeah, so they're not endangering the Soviet Union, but Germany is. So Germany is on the cusp of conquering the Soviet Union. They're on the cusp of, maybe not conquering the British because they couldn't defeat the British Air Force, which meant they were not going to be able to uh, cross the channel, make a channel crossing and invade, because you had to control the skies over the English Channel to have a successful landing. Um, but despite that fact, excuse me, guys, despite that fact, you had a situation in England that the German U-boats were sending more and more ships to the bottom of the sea, ships with supplies for Britain. They're getting to a point where they were not going to be able to continue to supply their troops and to continue to fight because they were losing all that supplies, all that Lend-Lease supplies and whatever else, um, to U-boat attacks. And so they're going to probably have to quit, surrender, because if you don't have materials to fight, then you can't fight. And so the thinking was, we need to take out the Germans, we need to knock out Germany while we have the help, while we have the allies in place to do it with the Soviets and with the British. Okay, so the first initial thought is keep them fighting, send them as much war materials as they need as we can produce while we get our forces up and running and get troops over. And the plan was a channel crossing, so crossing, so build up our forces in Allied territory in Britain, and then all you have is a short little channel crossing into France in 1943. So that was the plan initially. The Soviets were really pushing us to do so because they're saying, hey, we're taking all the brunt of the German forces. They're putting everything into attacking us. If you guys can get a force into France, um, that can really help. Obviously they want to alleviate the pressure on them that they would have to turn some forces back over to the west to defend against the British and the Americans. But two, they're saying, well, if you just get troops over there, you're gonna be in Germany in a couple weeks because they have no forces to defend it. Now, that's not the case. So they very much had a lot of troops stationed on the coast of France to defend against an invasion of France. Um, but obviously, like I said, the Soviets are saying, hey, we need that second front to relieve some of this pressure on us. And so they're really pushing for it. It did not happen, though. Unfortunately, this caused, guys, some tension between the U.S. and the Soviet Union that's going to carry over after the war. But basically, they felt like we were dealing in bad faith, that we were letting them sweat and letting them bleed out a little bit, and that we, if we wanted to have a channel crossing in 1943, we could have, but we didn't. And so that was kind of their feeling, where we're saying, hey, we got to make sure that this goes off well, that this works, or we might be sunk right at the start. We might never really get this effort to retake Europe from the Germans off the ground. And so, really, guys, instead, our first kind of foray into the fighting against Germany really is under Operation Torch, is what it's called. So this was the invasion of North Africa. So the Italians started fighting in North Africa. They were trying to remake the Roman Empire under Mussolini. That was his goal. And when they got in trouble against the British, the Germans stepped in and helped them, and so they're fighting in North Africa. They control much of West North Africa, so Morocco and Tunisia and those areas. The British control Egypt, and this is a big deal, guys, the fight in North Africa, because if the Germans take Egypt, they will then control the Suez Canal. So remember, guys, the Suez Canal was a canal built to connect the Mediterranean Sea with the Indian Ocean. So you don't have to go all the way around the southern tip of Africa. And so this is a major trading route for the British, and a lot of their raw materials they're using to fight the war is coming from Asia, coming from India mostly, through the Suez Canal. If the Germans control the Suez Canal, it's game over for the British. They're not going to have those raw materials. They're not going to have what they need to fight the war. And so this was big, big stakes. And so we said, okay, well, let's at least get a force over there and we can work our way up. So basically, guys, you have the largest, at that time, the largest ever amphibious assault. So you had hundreds and hundreds of warships that made their way to the North African coast, and you had the Americans land in North Africa. It was a relatively easy landing. So in that area of North Africa, you had the Vichy French, is what they're called. So this was, so remember, guys, the French, they were conquered by the Germans in 1940, and so the Germans had set up basically a puppet government to run France, and so this government was Vichy, the Vichy government, and so they were in charge of defending that area of North Africa. And they don't really like the Germans. They're just kind of, hey, we're being told what to do. And so there wasn't a whole lot of resistance initially on the landing because the Vichy French, they were in charge of defending that area of the North African coast. So the invasion was successful. We kind of get a footing into North Africa, help the British out, draw some forces away from Egypt, where the Germans had to start fighting our forces in North Africa as well. And then from that, guys, it's kind of like a staging ground. So you're right there on the Mediterranean, and so we from North Africa were able to jump over to the island of Sicily, conquer the island of Sicily. It's kind of interesting, guys. We actually recruited Sicilian mob bosses in America and said, "Hey, we'll help you. We'll get you out of prison if you help um, lead a revolt. Basically, get the Sicilians to revolt against the Italian government and help our troops when we land in Sicily." And so that's kind of an interesting side story to that. But then, guys, when they went from Sicily, they kind of climbed up that boot of Italy um, as well. Okay, now once we got into Italy up near the mountains, um, then that became a big problem because it's hard to beat an enemy that's defending a mountainous territory. So then we really got bogged down and couldn't get up into the rest of Europe. But that was kind of our first foray into the fighting in Europe. And then obviously, guys, the big one is Operation Overlord, which many people refer to as D-Day. So D-Day was June 6, 1944. Like I said, we built up our forces in Britain. We had a lot of trickery going on, guys, where we were moving forces around. We had even blow up tanks and things like that. So fake tanks that we were massing in an area. In a different area in Britain where it looked like, okay, they're going to cross here. They're going to cross and land here in France. So we really tried to sell the idea that we were going to make the shortest crossing, so the shortest distance between Britain and France, on the English Channel, which would be from Britain to Calais. And so we really tried to fool the Germans there and then go where they were not expecting us, which was Normandy. And we carried that off pretty successfully. Despite that fact, guys, like I said, the French coast was heavily guarded by the Germans. And so when our troops landed, there were a tremendous amount of casualties. A lot of men died taking those beaches and securing those beaches, which is crucial, guys. You have to secure a beachhead and move inland. If you don't, you're going to get pinned down and the defenders are going to drive you into the sea and it's going to be game over. And this was a real possibility, guys. Our commander of our forces, and he was also the Allied commander, General Dwight D. Eisenhower, so the overall Allied commander, he had actually written out a letter basically saying, hey, they attacked the night before, hey, the assault has failed, it's my fault, it's not our troops' fault, it's taking the blame for it. He had prepared that because he was worried it wasn't going to work. So he had that ready to go just in case. So that was a very real possibility, but because of this great sacrifice, especially on places like Omaha Beach, Utah Beach, there were a huge amount of casualties where men laid down their lives, guys, for this greater cause, to secure freedom, not just for our country, but around the world. Okay, and so this was a big, big day for us. They were able to successfully secure a beachhead, and obviously once you start conquering kind of those coastal areas, the biggest thing is then to where you can get troops and supplies on there. The biggest thing is to take a port. Okay, so once you take a port city, then now you can sail your ships right up there, unload it right on the docks. And so that was kind of the next goal. And then from there, guys, August, so we make pretty quick work from June to August 1944. Allies are able to liberate France, so take control of France from the Germans. We march into Paris successfully, victorious. And then, guys, May 7th, 1945. Oh, I'm sorry. A little typo there. Got it twice. My apologies, guys. And then, guys, we get bogged down as winter comes. Remember, even back then, there wasn't a whole lot of fighting taking place in the winter. Usually you tried to dig in on your position and just hold those lines